Now it gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce our speaker for the evening, Max C., who came all the way from Winnipeg, Canada.
I'm Mac Cheater, and I'm an alcoholic. The only thing I can do tonight is share with you my experience, strength, and hope in love, and hope that something I might say here will help somebody. A couple of weeks ago, I had a great privilege of sharing a weekend with my son-in-law. He was the Saturday night speaker and I spoke Sunday. And on the way down, there was four of us in the car, and one of the guys said to him, "Jerry, what are you going to talk about tonight?" And he said, "Well, I'm just going to do what you're supposed to do." He said, "It says in the big book that you say what it was like and what happened and what it's like now." And I was sitting in the back seat and I said, "But Jerry, that really is not meant to be what you speak about. You know, when that book was written, they had no idea that we would be traveling to Moorhead, Minnesota to speak tonight. That particular line in the book refers to the stories in the book." So when he got up to speak, he said, "I am going to share my experience, strength, and hope with you. But the way I'm going to do it is tell you what happened, what I was like, what happened, and what it's like now." So he will be 2 years sober on Tuesday, and he's getting pretty lippy. I am indeed grateful to be here. I want to thank Marilyn and all of those responsible for me being here. And I want to, too, thank the speakers that have spoken before me and those that have yet to come. And I'm sorry I'm going to leave early in the morning. At least I will have to leave here around 10 o'clock, so I will miss the afternoon and probably most of the morning session. I enjoyed last night, my friend. I thank you. I've enjoyed this whole weekend. I am an occasional jogger. I got up early this morning and ran down to the university, and what a beautiful place you have. What a beautiful city. What a beautiful country. What blessings God has bestowed on you. And I was invited one other time to come somewhere in this area, at least in this northern part of California. I forget where it was. I was so thrilled when I got the letter, and I read it, and I always wanted to come here, and everybody in Canada wants to come here. And they, at the bottom of the letter, they said, "Would you send an audition tape?" And I threw the letter away because I don't send audition tapes, and I auditioned for a long time to get here. I'm all done with auditioning, I think. I was brought up in a country community. I was born on a farm a few miles from Winnipeg. And the farm home where I was born still stands there, and I go out and look at it once in a while. It's no longer in our family. I had dreams a few years ago of acquiring that home and the half section of land that goes with that particular set of buildings, but I found out that the new owner has 7 sons and they all intend to be farmers, and I don't think that there's any way, and I don't think I could afford it anyway. But that house still stands there. My grandfather built it and I was born in that home, and so it's nice to go out and have a look at it. I was brought up in what you would call a good Christian family, and that is where most alcoholics were brought up. I like what our friend Joe from Tyler, Texas says, that good Christian families are just breeding grounds for alcoholics. But I was brought up in a home that, well, as I look back on it, I had every opportunity, everything given to me that a person could be given. I was surrounded by love. I cannot remember any bad time. I cannot remember any form of any kind of abuse. And although we were not wealthy, we were reasonably affluent. Part of my upbringing was in the 30s, the so-called dirty 30s. I can never remember our family being without an automobile. I can never remember our farm was equipped with electric power and running water. We didn't rough it in any way. We didn't have a lot of money to spend, but we didn't do without anything. All our needs were taken care of, and my grandfather was a prominent citizen, and our family was respected in the community, and people came to our home to seek counsel and guidance. My grandmother was active in her church and in the Women's Missionary Society and everything that was good in the community. She was a greatly respected lady, and I will never forget, as long as I live, I hope, how proud I was to walk into church with her on a Sunday morning, and I can remember the care she took and the habit she had of writing letters to people all over the world. Just about a week ago, I got a letter from my sister enclosing a copy of a letter that my grandmother had written in sympathy to a woman whose husband had just died. It was dated 1924, and it was such a beautiful letter that this lady had left it when she died. She left it in her will to my sister. Thought she would like to keep it as a keepsake of my grandmother's. And so this was the kind of home I was brought up in. Sunday afternoon, we would go to church and Sunday school on Sunday morning, but Sunday afternoon we would sit, and particularly in the wintertime, with around the kitchen stove, and my grandmother would read to us, and she would read all the good books, the kind of books that are good English, and the kind of books that you should be interested in and should have read to you as a child. And so when I look back, there is absolutely nothing in my background that would indicate that I was destined to become an alcoholic. There was no liquor kept in our home, not because there was any particular preaching against drinking, but it was just something that we could do without, and the money was spent elsewhere. Occasionally, in celebrations and at Christmas, there would be some wine, and I can remember my grandmother pouring sherry for her guests, and there was the odd bottle of brandy for medicinal purposes. There was nobody. We were never. It wasn't a factor in our home. Somewhere about the time I was a young teenager, in my early teens, I started to feel different. And as I look back, I know that I started to change then. And I don't know what it is that makes alcoholics different. Like, I don't know just how much of it is physical or how much of it is mental or whether we're all the same or not. But I do know that as I look back, and my sister and my brother and I, when we reminisce, they remember things that I don't remember. They remember the stupidest things. Everything I remember has to do with how I felt. I can remember feeling hurt. I can remember feeling that, I remember when I first heard that my father and mother were separated, how I felt different. I don't know if they did or not. They never mentioned it. I remember when my uncle got married and my grandparents retired from the farm, and I then lived with my uncle and aunt, and I felt that I wasn't part of their family. And they did nothing to make me feel that way. They did everything they possibly could do to love me and look after me. When I look back and think of the things they did for me and the way they treated me, I should have lived with a sense of gratitude and love for them, but I felt different, and I don't think my brother and sister felt that way. And so I remember the first drink I took, and I don't know whether that is significant. I don't know whether so-called normal people remember their first drinks or not. I never heard them talk about it. But I remember my first drink, and I remember what it did to me, because I owned the world. That first drink, and I owned the world. I not only was equal, I was superior to everybody I knew. And I tried for years to maintain that feeling. And for a long time it worked. For a long time that worked. I was the only kid I knew of in my high school that stopped in for a beer on the way home. And I still remember how offended I was when they put out our yearbook and they said my theme song was, I don't remember where or when. I was in senior high school when I was 15. I was not stupid. I progressed. I was a good student, but these city folk were sort of sissified, and they didn't stop in for a beer on the way home, and I was only questioned about my age once, and that was the first time I was in that beer parlor. I had gone to town on a Saturday night, as farm folk were wont to do in those days, and we pulled up, and my brother had already progressed to where he was going to high school and had left the farm, and some of the hired men said, "What are you going to do?" And it used to be I always would go to a show with my brother, or we'd go to a dance. I was always with my brother. This night I was alone, and I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. They said, would you like to have a beer? I said, sure, sounds good. We went into the beer parlor, and that's all they had in those days. They didn't have bars. They just had beer parlors. You had a choice, bottled beer, draft. Draft was 10 cents and bottled was 25. And the waiter said, how old are you? And before I could open my mouth, this guy told him how old I was. Told him I was 21. He said he wouldn't be sitting drinking with me if he was underage. They never questioned me after that. They told my brother to get out one day. He was with me. He was 2 years older than I was, and they told him to leave. And I was glad he left without making a fuss, or he would have blown it for me. But I knew that it made me feel good, and so that everything I did then, the first thing I did was drink. But I never got into serious trouble. Along came the war about the time I graduated from high school. Many people today say that the Second World War, when it started, there were so many people unemployed that they all flocked to join the army as a means of making a living. Well, I was not one of those people. Our high school class, we were very patriotic, naive young men. We wanted to go and fight the war and save our country, and we wanted to. We still, you see, had grown up listening to stories about the First War, and we knew about the people that didn't go and what was said about them, and so we wanted to go. We couldn't get there fast enough, and so we went to war, and it was legal to drink as long as you were in uniform, and they had wet canteens and you were meant to drink. And that was the routine. The routine was you got paid, you bought what you had to buy, like enough tobacco to keep you till next payday. And then you went and got drunk. And you drank until your money ran out, and then you waited until next payday. And I drank, well, I ran out the first night, and then you got to know who hung on to their money, you know, and you could be buddies with them for a few days, and then you wouldn't speak to them again till next payday, because who the hell needed them, you know. But I never got into any trouble, and I was a good soldier, and I got, when we were in England, I was sent to officers' training school, and I wound up a captain in the Royal Canadian Artillery, and I was very proud of that fact. Anybody that says that it was not better to be an officer is crazy. We lived a lot better, we made more money, we ate better, we dressed better, and we drank better. And the war progressed fine for me. I was a good soldier, I knew my job. I was a good leader of men. And the war ended, and I was disappointed. I was probably the only guy that was sorry, because I knew I was going to be a nothing again. Like my career was over. I think I was about 22. And there was nothing to do. We just had to wait to get sent home. And that's when I started to get into trouble, because we had nothing to do but drink. And then we drank like around the clock. We used to have 24-hour parties. And I never got into any serious trouble in that there was no criminal activity involved. I never got caught stealing anything. I did lose some Army vehicles, but they still belonged to the Army. All I had to do was find them. I couldn't remember where I had left them. But I would go to, I had friends in all ranks, and I'd go to a party that was held in the gunner's mess that I wasn't allowed to be there, and so I would take my tunic off at the door and take all my rank off and go in. And I had a whole bunch of buddies that were all, I was popular, I was invited there, but when the CO would come in and find me there, he would be very unhappy with me. And one day I found myself standing in front of him under close arrest. And he advised me that I would be court-martialed and that I was being charged with being drunk on duty. And there was no duty, but you're on duty 24 hours a day. It was just a trick. And so I wasn't doing anything, I was just drunk. And he advised me, and he said to me, if you drink as much in the next 8 years as you've drank in the last 8 days, you will be of no use to yourself or to anybody. And then I realized that this gentleman was serious, that he really meant to do that to me. And I will never forget the terrible sick feeling I had. I was barely able to stand, and then to have the thought of being sent home in disgrace and lose everything I'd worked so hard for. And then I remember saying to him, would it be all right if I sat down? Well, it wasn't common to sit down when you're standing at attention in front of the commanding officer. But he said, certainly, go ahead. I think he realized that if I didn't, I was going to fall down. And he said, I don't know what you will use for your defense, and I don't know where the words came from, but I said to him, I will plead chronic alcoholism. Now, I had never heard anything about alcoholism, but those words come out of my mouth. And he said, would you have a witness? And I said, yes, the doctor drank with me. Now, I suspected the doctor drank too much. And I had two friends. One was the dentist, and that was the dental officer, and so his name was Doe, and the medical officer was Moe. And so I drank with Moe and Doe, and they both could give evidence that I had alcoholic tendencies, I suppose, and he said that might work. And he said, supposing we don't court-martial you, what would you suggest we do with you? Because he didn't want to court-martial me. He just had a problem he wanted to get rid of. And I said to him, why don't you put me on the wagon for a couple of weeks? And I can still hear that gentleman scream. He repeated a couple of weeks at the top of his lungs. Well, he put me on the wagon indefinitely. I was not allowed to drink in any mess. I was not allowed to go into any bar. I could only go into my own mess because I had to go there because that's where the meals were served. But I was not allowed to drink. I was not allowed to drink alcohol of any kind. Well, they had no mix in those days. They had no Coke or ginger ale or anything of that nature. The only mix that was available was a local concoction made out of raspberries. And you mix a little cognac in raspberry juice, and nobody can tell by looking at it but what you're drinking straight raspberry juice. And I never missed a round. But I kept a long way away from that sour gentleman. And it wasn't long till he got sent home. And so when the new commanding officer came, I went right to see him and said, for some ridiculous reason, I'm not allowed to drink in the mess. Now, can you see any reason why I shouldn't be allowed? And he said, well, if you behave yourself, I suppose it will be all right. I said, I have always been a gentleman. And I was taken off that stupid no-drinking deal, and away I went again. Our regiment got home in November, and my family got the telegram saying we had arrived and that I would be on such and such a train and arriving at a certain time. My trunk arrived home. I never got home until February. I'm the original guy that started that deal, the expression, you missed the boat. I kept missing the boat. I would get back from London to where we were supposed to be, and they'd say, well, the boat left yesterday. Now, you might as well go on leave because there's nothing to do. There won't be any other boats for 2 weeks, and we'll put you on draft, and you can leave here in 2 weeks. In the meantime, you might as well go on leave. Well, I'd get back, and that boat would be gone. And all I had in the way of clothing, I had one little canvas bag with my entire worldly possessions in it. That's what I lived on from November until February. Kept washing the same socks, and sometimes I didn't bother washing them. But I survived, and I got home in February, and there was a beautiful sign saying, welcome home, son, that had been out in front of the house since November. And I met the same love and warmth and understanding that I had had when I left. And I wasn't there very long until I realized I can't stay here. If I stay here, all I'm going to do is break hearts. I cannot stay. It was a joke to start with. Like I would come home and I'd meet my mother, and she'd say, where in the world have you been, son? And I'd say, well, Mother, I don't really know where all I've been, but I did wake up in the Mayfair Hotel this morning, and I thought it was rather strange to be staying in a hotel when we're right in the same town, so I decided to come home. And she'd say, well, what am I going to say to your grandmother? And I'd say, Mother, that's your problem. I'm your son. Well, you could get away with that for a few weeks, but then it got a little bit sad, and so I decided to move on. And about that time, my grandfather took very seriously ill, and all the family were called home. One of our family was a doctor. He was a psychiatrist who at that time was in Toronto, Canada, working. And he had been working for the Department of Psychiatry at the province of Manitoba while I was overseas. And in his capacity as a psychiatrist and a doctor, he had been told on a trip to Minneapolis that there was some organization that had an answer to alcoholism. Would he investigate that and bring back anything he could find in the way of literature? So this uncle of mine, Brian Bird was his name, brought the first big book from Minneapolis to Winnipeg, and he was, along with another doctor, started the first group in Winnipeg. And one of the fellows that was at the first meeting is still in Winnipeg. Greta was there, and Brian was quite enthusiastic about Alcoholics Anonymous. So this time when my grandfather was ill and he was home, I can remember sitting on our front steps, and he told me all about this fellowship and how it worked with one drunk helping another drunk, and that they were able to share their experience and stay sober. And I thought it was a very interesting story, and that he was, I could understand his enthusiasm. After all, that's his business, and it really had nothing to do with me. But when I got to be a delegate, I was in New York, and I decided to fly to Cleveland on the way home and spend a weekend with him. He and his wife, who this time he was professor of psychiatry at Cleveland University, and had a private practice as well, and was living there quite comfortably in Shaker Heights. And I went to visit them, and I said, "Do you happen to remember the conversation we had?" And he said, "I certainly do." And I said, "Did you have something in mind for me at the time?" And he said, "I certainly did." It was 10 years after I talked to him before I came to this fellowship. I left home and I went to a town called Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, and there I met a gentleman called Cecil E. Corrigal, who some of you know. And Cecil had ambitions to be a railroader. When you see Cecil today, he is a very flashy, loud dresser. In those days, he wore overalls, and he wanted to be a railroader, and he wore railroad overalls and a railroad cap, and he was a very sloppy drunk. And he really wasn't working for the railroad. He hoped to get on the spare board. And he was unemployed and I was unemployed, and we spent our time drinking together. We would open the beer parlor in the morning and sit there. Neither one of us had any money. And then we would wait until somebody come in that would come over and buy a round, and then pretty soon we would have a table full of flat beer, and we would sit there all day, and then we'd go home, and both of us go home and tell our wives there was no work to be had in that town. And that's where I met Cecil. And Cecil went away and joined Alcoholics Anonymous because he got in a fight and wound up in a hospital, and he wasn't much of a fighter. And he got in a fight with a friend of mine who had been in the Army with me, and even I wouldn't have tackled him. And Cecil was just no match for him. He wound up in a hospital and wound up in Alcoholics Anonymous, but he was a very slow learner, and it took him 4 years to get back from me. I kept hoping he would learn enough to come back and tell me about it, but it took him a long time. When Cecil got sober, things started going good for him. And he used to meet me, and he started dressing up. And he got into business, and he started having money, and he used to tell me about this, and I resented the hell out of him. And I couldn't understand why people were so nice to that drunk when they weren't nice to me. And then he would come into the beer parlor where I would be drinking alone by this time, and I knew he was spying on me. And he would go out of there and yap all over town. And the funny thing was, I belonged to a club in town that was probably the worst drinking club you could belong to. And you almost had to be a drunk to get in. And they wouldn't let Cease in because he drank too much. And you know, I wound up sponsoring him as a member of that club after he got sober in AA. And I often told him I had more trouble getting him in the Kinsman Club than he had getting me into Alcoholics Anonymous. But one day I wound up like we all wind up. I wound up in a hotel room, and I had nowhere to go, and I had run out of time, and I had run out of people, and I had run out of everything. And I don't need to describe that to anybody in this room, because as we were told last night, we've been there. And I was not what you see tonight. I was a total mess. I was incapable of doing anything. I had acquired a wife and a family. I had a little boy and a little girl and a wife that I went to high school with and that I had loved as long as I could ever remember. And I still loved her dearly. But I was incapable of working. I was incapable of doing anything. I couldn't accept any responsibility. My family had sent several people to have a look and see what was wrong with me, because they knew something was wrong. But you know, they're not that hard to know, and they'd come, and they're only going to stay a couple of days anyway, and then you could put on a front for a few days, and you know, even to the point where you borrowed a car to make it look good, and then this day I just ran out, and I didn't know what to do. I was crying, and I was desperate, and I was already a failure at suicide. You know, it's when you can't even kill yourself, you're just a failure. And I've met a lot of suicide failures in this outfit. I tried to kill myself by swallowing aspirin. I took too many, and I made myself sick. And when I woke up and all the people were going to be feeling so sorry for me, I had thrown up all over myself, and everybody was mad at me. And when I had died that night, I had planned a funeral, and I was going to get even with them all. But I figured I'd die. I took this whole 100 aspirin and downed them. Doctor told me if I'd taken 40, it might have worked. It's not easy to commit suicide. I've met people, you know, have you ever met people that cut their wrists? Well, you know, you can't just cut your wrists. Your blood clots and it stops bleeding. Now, if anybody wants to know how to do that, I know how, but I better not tell you in case some of you try it. But there's a way you do it. It's not very nice. But I was a suicide failure. You see, I went about as far as you could go. There might be some things that you did that I didn't do. I did some things you didn't do. If we went back drinking, we'd all get to be doing them sooner or later. And if you didn't do some of the things I did, you didn't miss a damn thing. And I phoned Cecil, and his boss answered the phone. His boss was a friend of mine, and he said, Cecil's tied up right now. Can I help you? And I said, you told me one time that you were my friend. If I ever needed a friend, I need one now. He said, where are you? And I told him. He said, I'll be right over. And he come over, and he found me in this hotel room, and he picked up the phone, and he phoned Cecil and said, I don't care what you're doing, drop it and get over here. And he turned me over to Cecil, and Cecil phoned my wife and said, I got a guy here that's in pretty bad shape. What should I do with him? And she said, you might as well bring him home. I'll tell you this tonight, and I mean it as surely as I stand here. If I ever pick up another glass of alcohol, I hope I die right away. I am not afraid of getting drunk, but I don't want to ever have to get sober again. I don't know what it's like to go to a hospital or a treatment center or to have medication to get sober on, but I know that night the doctor gave me all the medication that he could legally give me to put me to sleep, and I just looked at him and said, you stupid bugger, if you'd give me a drink I could sleep. he finally said to my wife, you might as well give him one, because one more is not going to hurt him. And she gave me a beer. I've really never quite forgiven her for that. A fellow stood and held a bottle of some kind of saline solution that dripped into my arm, and our house wasn't equipped with those things they have in hospitals, and so he stood and held it all night while it dripped into my arm. The whole group came to 12-step me. I was never left alone. 24 hours a day they sat with me. I guess it was about the third day when the sheriff got there. Apparently this gentleman had been looking for me, and my wife kept telling him I wasn't home. And this day she said to him, well, he's home, but he's very sick and he's in bed. And he said, I don't care what shape he's in, I have to see him. And he came into the bedroom. Cecil was there. And he had some of those things they call writs and summonses and stuff, and that he had to serve. And I said, just put them in the top drawer over there with the rest of them. I had a whole drawer full of, I didn't write any bad checks, but some of them were slow. I met him sometime later, about 5 years later. I saw him in a hotel lobby, and I walked over to him and I said, you probably don't remember me. And he looked at me and he said, no, I don't. Have we met? And I said, yes, we met under the most strange circumstances. I was in bed at the time. You were in my bedroom on 20th Street in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, and you served me. He said, I remember you. I said, I want you to know I haven't had a drink. And he said, I am so thankful. He said, I told Cecil that day, he said, I hope you can do something for that young fellow because he's in terrible shape. Well, Cecil pulled out 20 questions. Did you ever see those 20 questions? Where you answer them and they have the code at the bottom, so you don't know. You're answering, yes and no and yes and no, and then you get in that silly thing at the bottom that says if you've answered 3 yeses, you're an alcoholic. Well, the questions were loaded. Now, it said, did you ever lose time from work? Could you think of a more stupid question to ask somebody? Did you ever lose? I called him in the middle of the day. I didn't call him at night. I was very thoughtful. I was a gentleman. I didn't phone in the middle of the night and wake people up. I called him during the day, so it was obvious I wasn't working. And then the clincher was, did you seek lower companions? Hell, I drank with him. So I said to him, I was a lead pipe cinch. You had me cold decked right from the start. I have never had to take a drink since the day I phoned Cecil, and that was the 12th of March, 1956. And I don't know whether you have a sponsor or not, but if you haven't got a sponsor, you should have one, because there hasn't been a week go by that we haven't talked. And we live many hundreds of miles apart. We've spent enough money on telephone calls to keep the average family, but we haven't had to drink. And I phone him, sometimes we phone 2 or 3 times a day. And sometimes we don't even get to talk. We just get $10 worth of laughing. And we try to beat the other guy. On Thursday, a fellow phoned me and said, "Have you got Cecil's telephone number?" And I said, "Yeah." "Are you going to phone him?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Tell him I've been trying to get him all day, and to have him phone me right away." You know what he did? He phoned our telephone operator and said, "Would you have Mac call this number?" and I called the number, and he had me all right. A couple of weeks ago when he was in Palm Springs, I fully intended to call him in Palm Springs because I knew he'd never be in his room, and I could have left word for him to call me. And you know, the weekend got by on me, and I missed it because that's what he did to me a few years ago. But we have a lot of fun, and we have walked so many miles together, and I could spend the whole evening talking about him. If you haven't got a sponsor, get a sponsor. Don't walk alone in this thing. There is nothing that either one of us have done that we haven't shared with each other. And I'll tell you, some people don't like him. But that's their problem. Because you see, perfection wasn't one of the qualifications. I didn't interview people the day I was phoning for help. And I didn't have to explain anything to him. And the other day he said to me, "You know, I don't think we've ever had a quarrel of any kind, not even when we were drinking together. We've never had bad words. And we've walked all these years together." When you come to Alcoholics Anonymous, the first thing you have to decide is whether you're an alcoholic or not. Now, that seems a little silly, but I don't care where you've come from. I don't care whether you've come from Skid Row or where you've come from. Well, I know for a fact that when you walk in the door of Alcoholics Anonymous, you wonder if you're bad enough. You walk in the door of Alcoholics Anonymous, and there isn't another place in the world that will take you, and you wonder if you're bad enough to join Alcoholics Anonymous. And you sit around here for 6 months wondering if you're really alcoholic. And yet, when they ask you to say you're an alcoholic, well, what are you going to do? I mean, we're not idiots. Certainly we say, "My name is Mac and I'm an alcoholic." You know, I wasn't going to get up and say, "My name is Mac and I'm a Presbyterian." I went along with the gag. I had no intention of staying here anyway. I just came here to get a lot of people off my back and get my life straightened out, and then I was going to leave you people. And so I know what it's like. And maybe there's somebody sitting out there tonight that hasn't been around very long that is still wondering whether they're bad enough, or whether you're really alcoholic or not. Because that's a real important thing to know. I mean, you could be in the wrong place. Now I want you to know that if you're wondering about it, you're in the right place. I happen to be married to a social drinker. That is an illness that has yet to be discovered. On a real heavy night, that girl will go through 3 ounces of alcohol. She'll go through half a case of 7-Up and 2 pounds of ice cubes. I will have been married to her 35 years on the 20th of September. She has never yet asked me if I thought she was alcoholic. It has never entered her mind. But you might be sitting out there up to your armpits in trouble, and you're wondering. So if you're wondering, you are. We have no known case of anybody sneaking in here. But we have a lot of people trying to sneak out. And I belong to a group called the Golden Slippers. That does not refer to that flower that looks like an orchid. It refers to people that go back drinking. And we do have people that go back and give it another shot. And let me tell you something, that if you run into somebody that goes back and gives it another shot, love them a little more. I have worked with people who have had 17 years of membership in this fellowship and not 1 year's sobriety. And yet, when you take them and lead them through the steps, they stay sober. And it's just that nobody ever did that to them before. Nobody has ever taken them through the steps and made an appointment for their fifth step and made them write out their fourth step. And when you do that, it works. And that is what our recovery program is about. And it is a recovery program. You can recover from alcoholism. The greatest news that has ever hit this world is the fact that you can recover from alcoholism. And I stand here a recovered alcoholic. And I go around the country telling people I'm a recovered alcoholic, and that's like saying four-letter words in church. But look at our program. It is not a program of sobriety, it's a program of recovery. And I can no longer hang anything on alcoholism. I'm as dry as I'm going to get. And if I'm a rotten SOB today, it's just because I'm a rotten SOB. I can't blame that on my alcoholism. If I practice this program to the best of my ability and do the things I'm supposed to do one day at a time, I can achieve recovery. And for God's sake, recover and get on with the business of living, because it's good. There's nothing wrong with being well. But you see, you have to give up things to get well. You have to give up your alibis and your excuses. And you can't say, well, remember now, I'm an alcoholic and I'm very sensitive. And you can't go to the banker and say, well, you know, I'm an alcoholic. And you can't use that anymore. You got to give all that up. And you know, if you want to be well, you got to give up the alibis. And you know what the book says? The book says it so beautifully. Those who do not recover are those who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. So you got a note. If you don't want to get well, be sick. Just don't give yourself to Alcoholics Anonymous. You see, I didn't join Alcoholics Anonymous. I belong to Alcoholics Anonymous. Whatever I am, I'm all yours. Whatever it is, you got it, my friends. I'm all yours. Everything I have, everything that is worthwhile in my life belongs to Alcoholics Anonymous. And if I don't use what I have for the service of God and those about me, it'll be taken away from me. You know, if I get up every morning and ask God for sobriety, you know, after 26 years, he's liable to say, oh my goodness, if he doesn't even know he's got it, I might as well take it away from him, you know. What would you do if you went to a doctor and after 26 years he told you, well, keep on recovering, you know? Hell, you'd have had gone through 15 doctors by that time. I wouldn't have anything to do with the doctor that was still talking about recovering after that many years. I would have switched, even if I had to pay for one. So recover. Take this thing and read the book and do the steps and get well. And tell yourself, look at yourself and say, I'm a well human being. And by God, I don't have to be sick anymore. And get on with the business of living. You know, it's a hard thing to understand what it is to be an alcoholic. It's hard for us that have been there. You know, an alcoholic, it's such a terrible illness. More people will die in San Jose from alcoholism in the next 12 months than any other single illness. And you read the magazines like I read this afternoon, and it says, for Father's Day, give them a bottle of Napoleon brandy. But on the cigarette package it said, this might be dangerous to your health. By God, there's pretty smart people in this world. All of our economic problems, if we could eliminate, you know, well, let's not get into that, but I'll tell you something. Booze is costing us more than 60% of our health costs and more than 60% of our welfare costs, and on both sides of the border. And we're still not doing much about it. The only place in the world that offers a program of recovery is Alcoholics Anonymous, and we're even afraid to go around telling people about it. You know, how long is it going to take? This thing has been working since 1935. How long is it going to take us to start believing? But you see, in order to recover, you have to believe in God. You have to believe in some power greater than yourself. And that is such a difficult proposition. Because that is another gamble you have to take. We are told that we have to live a spiritual way of life, and that in order to live a spiritual way of life, we have to believe in a power greater than ourselves, a God of our own understanding. And it is so difficult. I mean, the book puts it in a way that is so hard to understand. You see, when you read a sentence that says, either God is or he isn't, that's a real tough one, you know. Now, I'm going to run that by you once more. Either God is or he isn't. Now, when is the last time you remember buying a bottle of booze, phoning up your friends and saying, come on over, tonight we're going to discuss isn'ts? You can't talk about isn't. If God isn't, he isn't. There's nothing more to talk about. If he isn't, he isn't. Period. And then it says, if he is, he's everything. He's either everything or he's nothing. How can you talk about nothing? If you're not sure he's nothing, he's everything. That's pretty tough. It's real complicated stuff. If you want to look at him, look around, because everything is everything. If you want to see God, go and look in the eyes of a sober alcoholic. Go and talk to an Al-Anon. Go and talk to a kid. It says, my father is in Alcoholics Anonymous. I had a friend who was in the Air Force, and next door was a guy in the group, and his little girl said, my dad's a corporal in the Air Force, and this little girl said, that's nothing, my dad's in Alcoholics Anonymous. You see, we're in the people business, we're in the kid business, and the mother business, and the grandmother business, and we're in the people business. We're not in the drunk business, we're in the people business. Those treatment centers and those places like that, they're in the drunk business. We're in the people business. And you can't... I had a friend who was a lawyer, and he was a long time before he got sober. Frank had a beautiful way of expressing this. He said sometimes when you play golf, you take a long approach, and sometimes you take a short approach. He said, I just took the long approach. But we used to say to Frank, how long have you been sober now, Frank? And he'd say, what difference does it make? And you know, what difference does it make? If you're sober, that's as high as you can get. Frank was walking down the street one day, and he met a doctor in our town, and the doctor said to him, Frank, do you mind if I ask you a very personal question? And Frank said, no, not at all. I'll try and answer it for you. And he said to him, tell me, how come you're so happy? And Frank said, doctor, as I stand on this street and I look around, nearly every piece of property I can see from here belongs to you. And I don't even have the proverbial pot. What makes you think I'm so happy? He said, I can see it in your eyes. You see, you can't deny that. So you see, if you try the God experiment and act as though you believe, and do the things you're supposed to do, you will experience a thing in your life that you can't deny. And you see, that happened to me. I went to Cecil, and I'd been sober a short time, and I said, Cecil, there's an awful lot of God stuff in this program. They're Bible thumpers. And he said, how long have you been sober? And I told him, and he said, when is the last time you can remember going that long without a drink? And I honestly couldn't tell him. And then he said, do you think you did it all by yourself? And I knew I hadn't. We have a spiritual experience. We experience something that we can't account for. Well, it is nothing mysterious. It's that we think, act, and feel different than the way we did before. You can't be in this thing and not feel, act, and think different than you did before. And so that's what happened to me. I came to understand what it was to be an alcoholic. I came to understand that I was bodily and mentally different from my fellows. That somehow I was built different. It didn't mean I was inferior, it just meant I was different. And that there had to be a spiritual answer, and I had to come to believe in some kind of a God. And it didn't really matter what that was that I believed in, as long as I believed. I had to believe that there's oxygen in the air in order for me to live. I never checked this room out tonight, come to think of it. I just walked in here and assumed that it was going to be all right. You know, it's not a difficult thing. There are no guarantees that because you stay sober, life is going to be good for you. Life is going to be difficult for you, maybe. Maybe you're going to have challenges put in front of you that you can't figure out. And that's happened in our home. And I tell you about this thing, not because it's sad, that's the way it is. I told you I had 2 children. I had a boy and a girl. The girl was 5 years older. And they were taken away from us for 2 years when I first got sober. I couldn't support my family. My wife got a job and we moved into a basement room. And that's where we started from. And we were a long time before we got our children back. At least it seemed a long time. And then eventually we got a home of our own. And we grew up in that home as a family with the door wide open and full of drunks. And our kids grew up with drunks all around them. And it was funny because, you know, if somebody came that wasn't a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, they'd leave right away. And if it was a drunk, they'd sit down there and they'd listen. And, you know, and they never called a drunk mister. You know, I had a friend that he died when he was 84. He was Old Dave. My kids called him Old Dave. They never called him Mr. Murray. And Ed was Old Ed. They'd say, "Here comes Old Ed, Dad." And they'd sit around and one time somebody said to me, "What are you going to do for Christmas?" I said, "At Christmas we just sit around loving each other. We never go anywhere at Christmas. We just stay home and our door's wide open. Anybody wants to come is welcome, but by golly, we're not leaving." And that's the way it was. And one day I stood in the doctor's office and he told me our son had cancer. And you know, we lost our boy. It took 2 years. He had his leg removed and then he had 3 lung operations and he survived those. And after he had his 3rd lung operation, we thought that was it. And when he survived that, we went to Europe for a holiday. What a holiday we had. We traveled all over to Europe and he had a wonderful time. But it came back, and this time it came in the brain, and he had a brain hemorrhage. I was speaking at a conference way up in northern Alberta, and I got a phone call just before I went on the podium from the doctor who said, "Get home as fast as you can. He's had a brain hemorrhage." And he survived that brain hemorrhage. My wife and I sat with him for 18 days and 18 nights. And he survived it and came back home. But he took another one. And in 1974, just before Christmas, he died. Before he died, that boy went out and bought me a Christmas present. And it is a medallion. On one side, he had the word engraved, "Dad." On the other side, he had, "Thanks for being here." Because, you see, he knew it was no problem to phone me at 3 o'clock in the morning and I could go over to the hospital and we could talk things out. And he came to believe in a power greater than himself. And he said to me one night when he came home, he learned how to walk on his prosthesis, and he learned how to dance, and he come home from a dance and he said, "If there was a time machine that would take me back to what I was, I wouldn't take it. Because I have come to believe in a power greater than myself, and I can go to bed at night and I can pray to the God of my understanding, and I just know that things are going to be all right." And I know things are going to be all right, because I know someday I'm going to walk with that boy again. Because you see, I know this thing is too big for one lifetime. I know that what we're talking about is eternity, and that it doesn't end here. This is only the beginning. And we have no idea, we cannot conceive of how big this thing is. It was 2 years after our son died that I sat in our living room one night. My daughter had come over, and I thought maybe she'd had a tiff with her husband, and she come over and had dinner with us. And after dinner we went into the living room to have our coffee, and my wife said, "I've got something I've got to tell you." And telling you is the hardest part of the whole deal. And she told me that she had cancer. And so she went to the hospital, and she had an operation, and so far she's 100%. At least she was last night. My grandson was over there looking after her, and he said she was okay. Well, in 1980, I started having some strange things going on. And I went to my doctor and I said, "Doc, I got a problem with my intestines, and I think maybe I got cancer." And he said, "I think you're crazy." Well, I ordered my own barium X-ray, and I found a tumor. And I had quite a time consoling that doctor. But you see, because of this program, I was able to say to him, "Doc, it's no big deal. Because I've had the whole ball of wax. I've had everything that God can give man. Nobody owes me anything. And it's not a thing to feel sad about. Now, what we best do is get ourselves a surgeon, and you do that, because I'm going to Montreal, and I'll be back on Friday." And I did. I went to Montreal, and I came back on Friday, and I had a meeting with the surgeon, and I have a beautiful surgeon. He's the guy that talks straight from the shoulder. I said, "What chance have we got of this being malignant?" And he said, 100%. And I said, "Would you draw me a picture and show me what you're going to do?" And he said, "Yes." And he drew me a picture, and I said, "I hope you're a better doctor than you are an artist." But I survived that operation in 1980, and I was able to go to New Orleans, and I was able to share in the Sunday morning meeting at New Orleans, and I was able to go in the early morning fun run before that meeting. And last fall, I was able to run in the Terry Fox run, and I ran 10 kilometers. I ran 6 miles last fall and raised money for cancer research. Because Terry Fox died of the same cancer our son did. And I'm going to run in that run again this fall. And I've been asking people for their names and addresses. And if you think I'm going to write you nice friendly letters, you're crazy. I'm going to write and tell you how many miles I run and that I'd like some money. But last fall, after I started having some more trouble, and in December I went back in and had another operation. And last New Year's Eve is the first New Year's Eve that I don't remember since I got sober. And they found another tumor in me, and that they couldn't get it all. And so all they're doing with me now is they're buying me some time. And that's no big deal. I ran from the hotel down to the university this morning. And as long as I take my medication, I'm okay. And every 4 weeks I go back in the hospital, and they pour that chemical in me and let me out on Sunday, and I'm kind of groggy for a couple of days, but I don't miss any work. And my business is good, and my job is good, and I'm able to take in the odd weekend like this. and I wouldn't change one bit of it. I have absolutely no regrets, none whatsoever. And I know that everything is all right. You see, because I pray to that God of my understanding, and I know that I want His will to be done. And in closing, let me tell you a little story, a goofy little story, but when I travel on company business, I stay in the very most expensive hotels I can find. Because all the rest of the people in our business spend a lot of money on booze. And I don't spend any money on booze, so I go first class. You see, if you're going to go around and people know that I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, I don't want them to let them see me staying in some cheap joint. So, a few weeks ago, I was in Toronto, Canada, and I was staying in a very posh hotel. As a matter of fact, it's supposed to be the best there is in Canada. And the rent on the room was quite high. And I had been there for a week, and so I was checking out this day, and I went through all the drawers, and I came across a Gideon Bible. Now, it happened to have a gold cover on it, and there seemed to me to be some significance between the golden slippers and a golden Bible. And the fact that I have probably read more Gideon Bibles than any other Bible I've ever read, and most alcoholics have read more Gideon Bibles than any other Bibles. If you've ever sobered up in hotel rooms, there's not a lot of reading material around. And that Bible is so nice because it tells you what to look for. It's indexed properly. You don't have to read the whole thing to find what you're looking for. And so I phoned down to the desk and said, I've got kind of a strange request, and please understand that I'm sober and I'm quite sane. But I would like to obtain this Gideon Bible that's in my room, and I know that it's not for sale, but there must be some way that I can get this Bible. And the girl said, well, just a minute, I'll have to put you through to the office. And so she put me through to the manager, and I told the manager, and he said, well, just a minute, I'll get one of the assistant managers to look after you. And I got an assistant manager, and I went all through this story again, and finally I said to him, now look, it's getting close to the checkout hour, and I don't want to have to pay another day. At these rates, I could buy a lot of Bibles. So I just want you to get a quick answer and call me right back. Well, he didn't call me back, and as I was checking out, one of the girls said, is everything okay? And I said, well, almost. But I was supposed to get a call back from one of your assistant managers about a personal matter, and he was standing right there. And so he said, why didn't you just take it? And I said, because I understand it says in there, thou shalt not steal. Now, I also know that it says, not for sale. So, he said, well, I'll tell you what, I will give it to you. So he went up to the 30th floor of that hotel and got my golden Bible and brought it down and gave it to me. Well, I have a friend who is a Presbyterian minister. Presbyterian ministers are not noted for their belief in faith healing. But this fellow is a friend of mine, and he has come to see me many times, and he's prayed with me. But a week ago he asked me if I'd go and have lunch with him, and he said, I have been talking to some doctors, and I have told them I would like to pray for you in their presence. I would like to try some faith healing. And I have searched the Bible, and I found some passages that make it sound like it might be the right thing to do. I said to them, what did the doctors say? And they said, why have you taken this long? And so last Friday, the doctors arranged a private room in the hospital, and we went in and we sat down, and he took out a Bible and read some passages out of it. And I noticed that there was a lot of loose pages in his Bible. And he said to me, I guess you think I could afford a better Bible than this. And you know what I said to him? I said, I'm going to be in San Jose next weekend. I'll get you a better one. So I'm going to take him back the Gideon Bible out of my room. That day he cried and the doctor cried. One of the most moving experiences of my life, to have a man who loved me enough to want to put his hands on that tumor and ask God to take it away. And I said, there is only one condition, that we both agree that it be God's will, that I am not asking for anything other than His will, because I'm quite willing to accept whatever He has in store. And you see, you will find that if you grow in this fellowship, acceptance is not enough. That you have to learn to accept with gratitude. And I am grateful for what He has given me. And I am grateful that He has given me that tumor in order that I should know what that is all about. I am grateful that I am facing what my son faced. I am grateful that I am able to think of the pain that he had and think, how could I possibly complain? And what am I talking about? I'm talking about love. You see, that's what this program is all about. The only way that we can ever help anybody is to love them. The greatest power in the world is love. And all we do in Alcoholics Anonymous is love each other. There's no mystery, there's no magic to this thing. If you want to get sober, you just stop drinking. If you want to stay sober, hang around and somebody will love you enough to keep you here. And you know, we all had our heroes when we were kids, and some of the older folks probably remember a guy by the name of Babe Ruth. And Babe Ruth was a great baseball hero. Well, you know, Babe Ruth played baseball long after he shouldn't have been playing baseball. And Babe Ruth got traded. He didn't play out his last years with the team that had made him famous. And a Catholic priest who came to a prayer breakfast told me a story about Babe Ruth. He said Babe was playing this day and he was dropping balls. And he was striking out. And he struck out one time, and everybody in that stand, in that ballpark, stood up and booed him. The great ball hero that we all think of and remember, in his last days was booed. And everybody in that ballpark stood up and booed as he is he slunk off the field after striking out. And a little kid jumped over the fence, a little boy, and he ran over, and all he could do was reach up to his legs, and he threw his arms around the babe's legs, and he looked up with tears running down his cheeks and said, "Babe, I love you." And Babe reached down and he picked that little boy up and he said, "Little boy, I love you too." And you could hear a pin drop in that ballpark. And the love of that little boy silenced that whole crowd. Never underestimate the power of love. That's all we've got to give to each other. And I thank you for having me here and love everybody here. Thank you very much.